A very good morning and welcome to a special coverage of the budget session that begins in an hour from now with the President's address to a joint sitting of the two houses. Now, while the Union budget would be presented on the 1st of February, today our focus will be on the Economic Survey 2017-18. Indications are that the spotlight will be on rural economy and agriculture, so we're looking forward to that. And in the next 1 hour, we'll be talking about what we can expect from the Economic Survey that to some extent sets the tone for the Union budget. And we'll also talk about the significance of the President's address. Joining us on Rajya Sabha TV through the next 5 days, pre and post-budget, as you can see here, we've got Pranjal Sharma, senior financial journalist with us. And he's in fact been sending us reports from Davos as well, Pranjal. And that's been quite a successful one. I believe Prime Minister Modi was more popular than Shah Rukh Khan there.
Well, you know, he led the Indian delegation, and the way his style is to have a big branding presence and country's positioning at Davos, where the global business and economic and heads of state are gathered every year. I think what was fantastic is also the interest in India, which was higher than usual. Especially, you know, one smart thing which Prime Minister did is that he went after 3 or 4 years of being in charge. So he had something to show for his actions. So that made a big difference. Absolutely.
And through the next 1 hour, we've also got guests in our studio. We've got V.K. Agnihotri, former Secretary General of Rajya Sabha, with us, and also T.K. Arun, Editor of Opinion at the Economic Times, with us as well. We'll speak to all of you, of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for joining us this morning, which has been quite a foggy morning in Delhi today. But thankfully, no traffic, at least at this time of the day. All right, let's quickly take you through, of course, what the Economic Survey is. It's the flagship annual document of the Finance Ministry. Gives us a detailed account of the various sectors of the economy and overall economic scenario of the country in the past year, and also provides an outline for the year ahead. Now, the Economic Survey is generally presented 3 days before the Finance Minister presents the Union budget in Parliament. It analyzes trends in agricultural and industrial production, infrastructure, employment, money supply, prices, imports, exports, foreign exchange reserves, and other relevant economic factors. Now, India's first Economic Survey was presented in 1950-51. And up to 1964, it was actually presented along with the Union budget. From 1964 onwards, it was delinked from the budget. Economic Survey is prepared by the Economic Division of the Department of Economic Affairs in the Finance Ministry under the guidance of the Chief Economic Advisor. The final version of the Economic Survey is scrutinized by the Finance Secretary and approved by the Finance Minister. All right, so now that we've outlined, of course, why is the Economic Survey so important, let's start with you, T.K. Arun, you know, about the indicators. I just mentioned a couple, of course, but what are the indicators that we are hopefully looking forward to in this Economic Survey?
To begin with, let me tell you something about the Economic Survey. You know, when I started journalism, we generally believe you read the survey, you get some indications as to what will be there in the budget. But over time, this has changed. The Economic Survey is a product of sound analysis by economists, whereas the budget is a document that articulates the political requirements of the political leadership. The two need not always match, and particularly not in an election year. So over time, the Economic Survey has become a document to serve as a yardstick or a touchstone by which to measure the economic soundness of the budget and its proposals. So very often it'll have issues and priorities, which still list a number of things to be done. And you find in the budget, oh, none of those things are there.
But it's really an assessment, Arun, isn't it?
That is of the year that has gone by.
Correct.
Of that, it's an analysis of what has happened. Prognosis as what should be done, which is the focus of issues and priorities. That generally has been given a boost by most finance ministers over the past few years.
And the whole idea of having all these economists was to inform the finance ministry and the officials in terms of giving them the economic inputs to help them frame the policy.
Yes, and over time, over the last 10 years, the Economic Survey has become a very fairly sophisticated document with analysis that is rigorous by global standards. We have had some world-class economists holding the chief economist post.
Yes.
And they have created this tradition. Now it will be very difficult for somebody to live down that tradition.
But Mr. Agnihotri, if I can ask you, do you think that this is just an academic exercise or is it more than an academic exercise? Where, you know, as Arun is saying, that we are doing this only to ensure that, you know, the economy understands it, the economists know where exactly the economy is at a given point of time. But beyond that, has it been completely delinked from policy making?
No, I think it is part of the mechanism of making the executive accountable to the government, to the parliament, sorry. And that is why, apart from presenting the budget, the background to the budget, what happened to the last year's budget, and in terms of whatever was promised in the last year's budget, what are the government's achievement, and this is the way to prepare the parliament for discussion on the budget. I think that is the significance of economic survey report.
So you're saying it also informs all the MPs, the members of parliament and their officers, that this is where the economy is, and any policy intervention that they may want to see can be based on this document.
Yes, yes.
But has that been very successful, Arun?
Well, see, the actual outcomes are now contained in a separate outcome budget. Every year now the government comes out with a document which is the outcome budget, which says what was the intended intention of making a particular outlay on a particular area in the previous year's budget, and what has been the outcome. The outcome budget is there. And also what exactly was spent of the money that was allocated. That we will come to know not in the economic survey, but when the budget is presented and you see the last year's estimate. So only a budget estimate, because unless the year is complete, you don't really know how much money has been spent. So the information is sort of indicative, but not complete.
All right, just shifting a little focus away from the economic survey, which is of course something we'll watch today. But before that, of course, Mr. Agnihotri is going to be the President's address. It's going to be Mr. Ramnath Kovind's first address as President. And this time around, not just significant on that front, but also the fact that the budget session is not really the first time that the MPs are going to be meeting this year in Parliament. We saw a little bit of the winter session, you know, stretching on till the 5th of January. So in a sense, this is not the first day of work actually in January for the MPs. So take us through, you know, the significance of the President's address when this, of course, takes place.
According to the Constitution of India, Article 87, it is clearly mentioned that the President has the power to address the House. I mean, both the MPs of Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha assembled together at the commencement of the year, session that commences in the year. So the winter session did not commence. He only addresses at the commencement. So a session that is commencing is this session of, which you call the budget session. That is one thing. And of course, in an election year, the President also has the power to, right to address the first session of a new government or the new parliament. So those are the, two occasions when the formally President addresses the MPs of the two houses sitting together. So that is the reason why technically, even though the members of the two houses had a few days of sitting this year, earlier this month, but the session that is commencing this year is this budget session.
All right. And can you give us an idea what is it that we'll be seeing as far as procedure is concerned today?
Today, of course, as per the list of business of the two houses, there are only two main things that are going to be done. One is presenting a copy of the President's, laying the copy of the President's address on the table of the two houses, and laying the copy of the economic survey report on the table of the two houses. Although the Lok Sabha sitting is only devoted to this, in the Rajya Sabha there are two additional items. One is, some MPs who have been elected maybe in between, they will be sworn in, and there are some obituaries, some deaths in between, so some obituary references are also scheduled.
All right. Let's now focus, in fact, to, of course, the financial indicators. And one, of course, big thing, Pranjal, which is going to be, of course, GDP, which in a sense is going to also set the tone in a sense of what we'll be expecting in the union budget as well. What with, of course, indicators from the World Bank and IMF as well, showing that it's going to be, of course, move beyond China this time around. If you could get those figures in at this point of time. And Arun, if you could talk about the significance of how GDP is going to actually bear.
Actually, let me add to this. You mentioned IMF. Arun, it will be good to know your views on the projections that IMF has made for the region as well as for India.
See, the IMF has no independent ways of projecting India's economic growth apart from India's own national authorities. So our Central Statistics Office is the primary source of figures for India's growth. And they have put a conservative figure for the current economic year, that's 6.5%, even lower than what the RBI thought would be, of 6.7%. Now, this actually makes it even more likely that next year would show a little spurt in economic growth. If your baseline is poor.
And next year they projected 7.3.
Yeah, so that is likely.
Yeah.
But the main thing is we have to get our investment up. Today the investment rate, which is the gross fixed capital formation as a share of your total GDP, is today at an all-time, well, it's the lowest since 2003-04. Now, it was at a peak 38%. Investment was 38% of GDP. Now, fixed capital formation is around 26.4% of GDP when you measure both in current prices. Now, this has to go up if growth has to be sustained.
That's an absolutely critical point, Arun. I agree. I think that kick-starting the new investment cycle, which has gone down over the last decade or so, and I think this government has been trying very hard to bring it back, but it is being stalled by several issues, including NPAs, which have not allowed the right kind of borrowers to come into the market. What do you think will be the priority of the government in this budget, which could perhaps be the last budget before elections, for kick-starting this investment? Because this is politically important and, of course, absolutely a must for the economy.
So, it is actually private investment, basically household, meaning unorganized sector industry as well as household, which are holding back on investment. Corporate investment actually is not all that poor. So, how will you get the households to invest, unorganized industry to invest? So, I think affordable housing has been a major preoccupation with this government, and it is good both politically as well as economically. People like to have own homes, they like getting subsidy from the government for building homes. So, if the government extends the scheme it already has to give some subsidy from the budget for affordable, I think that is something we should hope to see, because if you build more homes, it will also create demand for cement, steel, construction, labor, a whole lot of things which will further push up a momentum to economic growth. So, that is something the budget can do. But the other things, you know, if you will, ending rural distress will be a major political goal in this budget. The government must be seen to be doing something to address the farmers' issues. So, investment in, say, rural storage, completing the rural electrification drive, the rural road building, these are the things which will finally make it possible for food processing, general agro-processing industry to take place. Now, farmers' incomes cannot really go up by jacking up your minimum support prices beyond a point, because these have to be in line with global prices, and you cannot keep them artificially high without incurring a huge cost. So, then if your prices cannot go up, then how does the farmer get a better price? By being able to capture the value of all that he produces. Now, a whole lot of stuff, particularly for fruits and vegetables, goes waste. If that can be avoided, his income will go up, he'll have an incentive to produce more. And similarly, if, you know, to take an example, cotton in Gujarat is a very profitable crop, mostly because the first act of value addition in cotton, that is ginning, removing the seed from that fluffy ball that comes out, is done right there in the village, because Gujarat has rural power. And when the ginning is done in the village, there is forward visibility for the farmer as to what is the price that is output actually is produced actually commands.
So, the connect to the market is much better.
Yes.
Both information and fiscally.
So, the building that market linkage should be a prime focus in agriculture.
Okay.
And that is something that the government hopefully will try to address in this budget.
But that electronic agricultural market plan which was announced a couple of years ago, will that be part of this?
See, if you are in some remote, unconnected village in Bihar, even if through your phone, you know what the price in the market is, how do you take your produce there? So, unless there is physical connectivity and the means of transporting your produce and physically reaching that market, this information is useless.
Absolutely. All right. While we're talking, of course, about the farming sector, about the agricultural sector, we're also bringing up those visuals there, those graphics there for you. Of course, as you can see, we saw a peak, of course, of 4.9, and after that, sliding down of the figures, and that is in fact something that perhaps we'll be seeing the government focus on. What with, of course, we are continuously saying it's an election year, it's going to be crucial. Although Prime Minister Modi did say that the common man does not expect freebies, so we are not going to be giving a populist budget, is at least the indication, at least from him, that we've got. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. The optics something else and what in reality we do see, isn't it, Pranjal? And talking about the various sectors that we'll be focusing on, clearly the markets also looking forward to the economic survey. It's been, of course, on a high in the past few days, and today it's hit an all-time high again, Sensex and Nifty both. So we'll wait and see if after the economic survey that trend continues. But very quickly, let's go across to our correspondent. We've got Arvind Kumar Singh, in fact, in Parliament, who's been tracking developments there, and he's going to be giving us constant updates on what takes place there in Parliament today. Arvindji, first of all, just give us an idea today, as far as procedure is concerned, what will we be seeing today after the President's address? It will start, of course, but following that, when do we see the economic survey being tabled?
जी, देखिए, जहाँ तक इकोनॉमिक सर्वे की बात है, तो सबसे पहले तो अभी पूरी तैयारियां हो रही। प्रेसिडेंट जो है वो एड्रेस करेंगे। राष्ट्रपति का जो अभिभाषण है वो 11 बजे के आसपास होगा और उसकी पूरी तैयारियां यहाँ हो रही हैं। और उसके अभिभाषण के करीब 30 मिनट के बाद जो है लोकसभा की सीटिंग होगी, जिसमें जो है सबसे पहले जो है प्रेसिडेंट के एड्रेस की कॉपी टेबल होगी और उसके बाद जो है इकोनॉमिक सर्वे जो है फाइनेंस मिनिस्टर रखेंगे और राज्यसभा में करीब 45 मिनट के बाद जो है ये दोनों प्रक्रिया इसी तरह से जो है अपनाई जाएगी। और जैसे कि चर्चा हो रही थी हमारे यहाँ इसमें जो है कि जो इकोनॉमिक सर्वे है और जो राष्ट्रपति के जो अभिभाषण है, पहले मैं बताना चाहूँगा इसमें कि ये बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण संवैधानिक कृत्य है। हालांकि जो राष्ट्रपति जी हैं वो दोनों हाउस में किसी के मेंबर नहीं होते, लेकिन इसके बावजूद वो बहुत ही संसद के अभिन्न अंग होते हैं और उनके अभिभाषण में जहाँ एक तरफ जो है इकोनॉमी की दिशा वहीं दूसरी ओर सरकार की नीतियाँ किस तरफ जा रही हैं, क्या उपलब्धियां हुई हैं, क्योंकि ये आखिरी बजट है जो है पूर्ण बजट है इस लोकसभा का, तो मुझे लगता है इस पर सबकी निगाहें लगी हुई है ट्रेसी।
Absolutely. And talking about the economic survey, Mr. Agnihotri, was it a big deal even, till a few years back, the economic survey? Did it actually serve as an indicator as to how, the budget is going to be formed or how, the next fiscal year is going to be?
So as Mr. Soon has said and Pranjal has said and Mr. Alice said, I mean, it used to be a very important event in which the audience or the people of India used to look forward to, but now it has not remained so, and especially with these outcome budget and other things, performance budget and etc. being added, they contain more information, and this is only, as I said, an instrument of accountability and overall policy issues relating to government, but it doesn't really lead to any input into the budget.
Here, Dr. Agnihotri, the big question also is that the term of this government is expected to end in 2019. So what are the chances that this could be the last full budget exercise, including the economic survey?
Yes, it is, and it all depends on what the government has gathered as its feedback from the people in the last 4 years. As it was said that the public is not looking for freebies. So if that is the impression of the government in the context of its performance over the last 4 years, then I think it is what the government will do, and not necessarily preparing for some freebies to win the votes. And maybe if the government is confident enough of getting back into authority, then you may still, you will never know, see a full budget next year.
But Arun, if I can bring you in on this, this is again a historic budget, not just because of the fact that it's 1 year before the elections, but the fact that GST is in place, which means one large part of the budget is no longer part of the budget making exercise. It's been done completely by a different set of people under the GST Council. What kind of impact do you think it will have both on the economic survey and the budget?
On the economic survey, it will not have any major impact because it's a matter of analysis of what happens. Before coming to your question, let me say that the economic survey used to contain some vital information which has now been dropped. The state of the electricity boards. How much loss our electricity boards make is actually very integral to understanding how the economy is going to shape up. Now that has been dropped for the last few years, and nor does the any other source, the Power Ministry or somebody else, put this information out in the public domain. We get this once a year now, and that too, from very disparate sources. Now coming to the impact of the GST.
No, but that was an important figure because it also gave a sense of the fiscal deficit of the states, which if you combine with what's happening in the center, gave you a much deeper picture.
Yeah.
So that you're saying that this kind of information should be brought back in.
Yes, it should be. Yeah, very much.
But what is the reason? Has there been an argument explained why these figures are no longer part of the survey?
Never. And as for the GST, you are absolutely right. Now excise duties go out of the budget. That is now part of the GST Council's mandate. However, now GST does something very interesting. It has the capability to lead you to income that has hitherto been hidden.
Correct.
It creates audit trails. First, to those to whom this entity supplies. Company is part of GST.
Correct.
Then to whom that company supplies, it creates audit trails. And from whom it has purchased, again it creates audit trails. So it generates multiple audit trails. And therefore, it leads to possibly detecting income that had hitherto remained hidden. Plus, there is a simple economic identity which no company can hope to escape, which is that gross value added equals gross profits plus wages and salaries. Your salary bill plus your gross profits, this is your value added.
But GST has a very, very critical impact on revenues, and which is the whole idea is to improve revenue generation from the economy. Why wouldn't that be reflected, to come back, why wouldn't that be reflected in the economic survey? Because the economic survey will have to take into account the fact that from 1st of July 2017 GST kicked in, and as a result of that, the state of the economy as reflected by the survey will have to factor that in.
Yes, but now we already have data up till December. So the survey doesn't have to really bring that out. It's already out in the public domain. So the thing is stabilizing as it was expected to. Nobody had imagined that GST would have a perfect launch and everything would be running smooth right from day one. It will take some months. So it is in that process coming through. The government has to show the willingness to set things right once it is brought to their attention that some things are not right. So that is happening. That's a good part of it. Now, people, when they talk about GST, mostly tend to look at the income from this tax. But I'm saying it will also increase the possibility of collecting tax from direct taxes.
Absolutely. So that multiplier effect of sorts.
Yes. So actually, when I wrote on the budget, I said, without much risk of running a huge fiscal deficit, the government can actually aim for a larger budget. Our budgets have shrunk over the years. Today, the union budget is some 12.5% of GDP. It used to be as high as 17% of GDP. Now, the government can try to have, say, a budget that says, say, 14% of GDP. In this case, you'll be able to have larger outlays, spend more on many things that are required, both to boost growth as well as address.
And some of the figures which are on the screen, you can see that there has been a bit of a dip, but it's come back
picking
again.
Up, in fact. Yes.
Arun. So it's also because the system is stabilizing, as you are saying. How much of this new improved revenue is going to improve the fiscal situation of the government? I know that it's going to take 3 or 4 years before its real impact and ground level up transformation takes place. But in the early months, do you think that for this year there could be some better numbers that Finance Minister could be carrying?
I think so. See, it all depends on how well you manage to analyze the data. Once GST brings in not only revenue, also data. Now you have to crunch those numbers.
All right. Let's just cut into the Prime Minister speaking.
संसद में हम पारित नहीं करवा पाए। मैं आशा करता हूं और मैं देश के सभी राजनीतिक दलों को विनम्र आग्रह करता हूं कि इस सत्र में 3 तलाक, महिलाओं के, विशेष करके मुस्लिम महिलाओं के हक की रक्षा करने वाले इस निर्णय को हम सब पारित करें और 2018 के नए वर्ष की एक उत्तम भेंट सौगात हमारी मुस्लिम महिलाओं को हम दें। बजट सत्र अत्यंत महत्वपूर्ण होता है। पूरा विश्व जब भारत की अर्थव्यवस्था के प्रति बहुत ही आशावान है, भारत की राह, भारत की प्रगति पर विश्व की सभी क्रेडिट रेटिंग एजेंसीज हो, वर्ल्ड बैंक हो, IMF हो, बहुत ही सकारात्मक अपने ओपिनियन देती रही है। ये बजट देश की तेज गति से आगे बढ़ रही अर्थव्यवस्था को एक नई ऊर्जा देने वाला, देश के सामान्य से सामान्य मानवीय की आशा अपेक्षाओं को परिपूर्ण करने वाला बजट आएगा। और बजट के बाद एक महीने भर भिन्न भिन्न कमेटियों में बजट की विशद चर्चा होती है। अनुभव ये है कि उन कमेटियों में दल से ऊपर देश होता है। सभी दल के लोग, सत्ता पक्ष के लोग भी कमियां उजागर करते हैं और विपक्ष के बंधु उसकी खूबियों को उजागर करते हैं। यानी एक प्रकार का बहुत ही हेल्दी एनवायरनमेंट होता है, हेल्दी एटमॉस्फेयर होता है। कल जब ऑल पार्टी मीटिंग हुई तो मैंने आग्रह किया है कि हम इस महीने की जो चर्चा सत्र रहता है कमेटियों के अंदर, उसका भरपूर उपयोग करें और बजट का सर्वाधिक लाभ देश के सामान्य मानवी तक कैसे पहुंचे, दलित, पीड़ित, शोषित, वंचित को कैसे मिले, गांव गरीब को कैसे मिले, किसान मजदूर को कैसे मिले, इस पर हम व्यापक चिंतन करें, सकारात्मक सुझाव दें और रोड मैप बना करके हम आगे बढ़े। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
All right, so the Prime Minister there addressing the media just before, of course, the budget session begins. Some crucial points, of course, that he's made. One, of course, is, of course, talking about the budget, the upcoming union budget, saying that it's a budget that's going to be beneficial for all. And also, in fact, asking parties to not only look at the budget in, of course, a critical manner, but also in a wholesome manner that is, of course, going to be beneficial to everyone. Arvind Kumar Singh, our correspondent, in fact, still with us in Parliament. Arvind ji, there's about 30 minutes to go for the news, for the budget session to begin. Aapke liye, what are the takeaways that you felt as far as Prime Minister's, that statement that he just made a short while back?
देखिए टीसी जी, कल भी प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने एक बात कही और आज भी कही है स्टैंडिंग कमेटीज़ को लेकर के, क्योंकि इसके बीच में करीब एक महीने तक पार्लियामेंट की स्टैंडिंग कमेटीज़ की मीटिंग होगी। प्राइम मिनिस्टर ये चाहते हैं कि और ज़्यादा प्रोडक्टिव हों और ज़्यादा एक्टिव हों और वो एक नई दिशा दें, एक तरह से रोल मॉडल बने। तो एक चीज़ तो ये है। दूसरी चीज़ ये है जो है टीसी जी, एक बात जो हमारी चर्चा भी चल रही थी कि सबसे ज़्यादा जो फोकस में बातें आ रही है वो है कि एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर पर सरकार ज़्यादा ध्यान देना चाह रही है, क्योंकि इस समय एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर बहुत ही ज़्यादा चुनौतियों से जूझ रहा है और उम्मीद ये लोग कर रहे हैं कि ये इस सेक्टर पर और इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर जो है, ये दोनों सेक्टर पर जो सरकार का विशेष ध्यान होगा टीसी। और प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने जो है उम्मीद जताई है कि जिस तरह से तेज़ी से जो आर्थिक स्थितियाँ मजबूत हो रही हैं, वर्ल्ड ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो है उसकी तारीफ़ कर रहे हैं, तो उसे विकास की दिशा में ले जाने वाला ये बजट होगा। और यहाँ लगभग तैयारियां हो चुकी हैं। राष्ट्रपति जी का आगमन थोड़ी देर के अंदर होगा।
अरविंद, मुझे आपसे,
जैसा कि आप जानती हैं कि जो सारे शीर्ष लोग हैं वो उनकी अगवानी के लिए यहाँ जो है खड़े हैं, तैयारी में है लगभग। तो मुझे लग रहा है कि इतना ही कहना मुझे। जी
अरविंद, मैं प्रांजल बोल रहा हूँ। आपसे एक सवाल ये करना था। एक तो जो प्रधानमंत्री ने बोला, इसमें लगता है राजनीतिक मुद्दा सामने ज़्यादा उभर के आया है, जो उन्होंने ट्रिपल तलाक की बात बोली है, तो मुझे लगता है ये भी मुद्दा हावी रहेगा बजट सत्र में।
हाँ देखिए, बिल्कुल सर, ट्रिपल तलाक वाले इशू पर कल भी जो है जो ऑल पार्टी मीटिंग हुई उसमें बात उठी और लोगों ने पूछा कि भाई जो अपोजिशन है वो तो ये चाह रहा है कि सेलेक्ट कमेटी में इसको भेजा जाए। तो उसमें मंत्री जी का ये कहना था, जो संसदीय कार्य मंत्री हैं, कि ये मामला अपर हाउस जो है उसके उनको तय करना है कि इस पर क्या स्टैंड हो। लेकिन कई इंपॉर्टेंट बिल है, बताऊँ 28 बिल जो है ये लोकसभा में पेंडिंग पड़े हुए हैं और 39 बिल जो है ये राज्यसभा में पेंडिंग पड़े हुए हैं। इनमें से कई बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट है, जिसमें जजेज की सैलरी का जो बिल है जो कि अभी लोकसभा में पास हुआ था। तो मुझे लग रहा है कि ये जो विधेयक हैं इनके पास करने के लिए हालांकि बहुत ज़्यादा समय नहीं है, क्योंकि ये सत्र छोटा है, अपोजिशन कह रहा है। तो मुझे लग रहा है कि इसके बावजूद जो ये शुरुआती चंक है इसमें तो औपचारिकताएँ होंगी, राष्ट्रपति के अभिभाषण पर धन्यवाद प्रस्ताव होगा और बजट रखा जाएगा।
लेकिन अरविंद जी ये लग रहा है कि प्रधानमंत्री ने जो अपना वक्तव्य दिया है, अभी जो बोला है कि वो इस तलाक के मामले में पीछे नहीं हटने वाले हैं। लेकिन साथ में आपसे ये भी पूछना है कि जो राष्ट्रपति का जो अभिवादन होगा उस समय उनके भी कुछ संकेत आते हैं, क्योंकि बजट सत्र में बोलेंगे सरकार जो अपनी नीतियाँ अपनाती है वो राष्ट्रपति भी अपने भाषण में उसके कुछ संकेत देते हैं। उस पर आप ज़रा रोशनी डालिए।
हाँ जी सर, जो भी ज्वलंत मुद्दे हैं देश के सामने और जो नीतियां हैं, जो सरकार ने उपलब्धियां हासिल की हैं, निश्चित तौर पर जो राष्ट्रपति जी का अभिभाषण है उनमें ये सारी बातें आएंगी, क्योंकि एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण नीति दस्तावेज होता है जो राष्ट्रपति का अभिभाषण। तो जैसा कि आपने कहा, लगता है कि ये बातें भी सामने आ सकती हैं जो है। और जो हमारा जो चुनौती वाले जो सेक्टर्स हैं, खासतौर पर जो एग्रीकल्चर है जो बहुत ज़्यादा चुनौतीपूर्ण स्थितियों से गुजर रहा है, और प्रधानमंत्री जी भी इसके बारे में चिंता व्यक्त कर चुके हैं और कह चुके हैं कि केंद्र और राज्य सरकारों को मिलकर इससे चुनौती से निपटना होगा। फार्मर्स की जो इनकम है डबल करने का इशू, तो मुझे लग रहा है ये सारी बातें जो है राष्ट्रपति जी के अभिभाषण में आएंगी और बहुत सारे संकेत मिलेंगे। जी सर,
धन्यवाद। अरविंद जी आपके पास दोबारा आते हैं। डॉक्टर अग्निहोत्री, दिस सेम क्वेश्चन आई हैव फॉर यू, दैट the president's address is usually influenced by the government's thinking and the government's shares. So while the economic survey, as we've been discussing, may not have some indications or hint, would the president's address offer some hints?
Yes, according to the Article 87, the reason why the president addresses the members of the two houses assembled together in the first session, and now it is the budget session of course, is that he has to tell the members why this session has been called. So when his speech is basically to satisfy this requirement, that he has to inform them that what is going to happen in this session. And therefore, naturally the policies etc. which the government has been following and how they will get reflected in the future action of the government, or then whatever action or activities are proposed to be taken up, legislation etc. during the budget session, all this will be part of this thing. So that is what I would say, that perhaps the president's address will have more indication about the kind of the budget that we may have.
But in this, from the statement made by the Prime Minister, do you think that this budget session could be more political and then less economic?
That always has been. I mean, it is nothing new, and especially as he has highlighted this triple talaq bill, I think that is going to be a very important thing which will affect the working of this budget session.
Also, Dr. Agnihotri, do you also see this as a trend in the past few years, especially the past decade or so, where you have these meetings, of course, of the political parties ahead of any kind of a session, where you have a prime minister talking and also appealing to the opposition? Let's make sure that work gets, it progresses in a proper manner. The kind of indications that you get ahead of a session, and even while during the session. Do you see this as a trend in the past few years, that it seems to have the role of the opposition seems to have gotten stronger? Is that a trend that you notice?
Well, that is partly due to you. I mean, the media is so strong that the role of the opposition also has come to the forefront. But generally in these meetings, a consensus the government or the speaker in terms of conduct of business in the House tries to get. And some times ago, even the chairman of Rajya Sabha used to have this kind of meeting, but I have not heard about such a meeting this time. So it is all depends on what consensus emerges, and most of the time what is seen is that even though during these meetings all the things are not put on the table by the opposition, they do develop their own agenda as to how they will conduct their business or their approach to the coming session. Because these kind of meetings are there in all beginning of all sessions of Parliament.
Arun, this same point about reading into the mind of the government, which is always a very interesting exercise at this stage before the budget and the economic survey are announced. Will the President's address have some hints on the priorities of the government, which used to be part of the survey, but now the survey is more assessment of the past, but the President's address is more future oriented. Do you expect, or would you read into that?
Of course, the government's address is far more indicative of the government's mind than the economic survey is. The economic survey is more a technocratic document from the chief economist, whereas the government speech is written by the government. Sorry, the President's speech is written by the government.
Right.
So he just delivers it.
Right.
So and it's not just the President's that will contain political content. The opposition will use the budget session to do its normal job.
Yes.
If you look around the country, you find all kinds of violent incidents happening. Children's school buses are being stolen.
Absolutely.
There are rapes happening virtually every day and who are getting reported. You have communal violence rocking Uttar Pradesh.
All right.
So all these issues will also find reflection.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, Arun, but we are getting those live visuals of President Ramnath Kovind making his way, of course, to Parliament, and he will be making, in fact, his first address as President to both the houses in just a short while from now. While we, of course, stay with these visuals, we are, of course, talking about the significance of what is the President's address at this juncture of the session, of a budget session. We'll stay with these visuals, and since we are talking, of course, on the economic factors, economic indicators really that are going to be for the coming financial year. One sector that, of course, everyone's going to be watching is also the banking sector, Arun. It's faced a lot of challenges in the past year, especially what with the NPAs. But give us a sense of what we'll be seeing on that front as far as the banking sector is concerned.
So the government already announced its measures for banking.
That's right. The finance minister did mention it.
So there is fresh capital for the banking sector, and there is a package of reforms, which to my mind did not go far enough. Ultimately, why did banks build up these huge non-performing assets, the portfolio of bad loans in the first place? Are the reforms that have been announced sufficient to ensure that there will be no repeat of performance of this kind of bad decision making? To my mind, that has not been there. I think two things are required. One is we need to actively promote a debt market so that infrastructure is financed by bonds rather than banks.
The debt market has been discussed for more than a decade, Arun. So what is holding things back?
There are many things, all kinds of lethargy. I mean, starting with the banks themselves. Banks don't want to lose their prime clients to the bond market. Who will they lend to? They'll actually have to go around, scrounge around for, borrow.
So the key issue is the competence of the banking system, especially the government-run banking system. And then we come back to the issue of either disinvestment or professionalizing them, or disconnecting them from government interference. So these are the issues. I think banking sector reform, looking at its various dimensions, is still one critical aspect which successive governments have been attempting to, but not been able to really make that difference yet. What is this now too late for this government to even attempt banking sector reforms?
They can start the reform process, but it will not be complete during its tenure. They brought in this Banking Boards Bureau. You heard nothing about it in the final reform package that the government announced. It has no role, which means there is no thought-through plan to revamp the public sector banks. It's not enough to say that the government will keep an arm's distance between them itself and the banks. You need an organizational structure which ensures that the government actually stays away.
Yes.
If you don't want to privatize the banks, you at least create a holding company and let the holding company appoint the boards and supervise the work.
So consolidation will not work, where there has been some effort to make some of the smaller, unviable banks to be merged with the larger banks. Is that a step in the right direction?
If you create too many banks that are too big to fail, that's not good. We need banks that are big, small, the entire range. A very big bank might have no incentive to actually go out in the rural areas and lend to small and medium companies. But a small bank will do that. But if you need to finance a large merger, you need a very big bank.
But I want to bring in Dr. Agnihotri on this point. Is this not just economic but a political issue as well? To improve the performance of the bank and to perhaps get them disconnected from the government, that could create a political problem as well.
Well, banks have also been through ups and downs. And actually, if I see these graphs, I find that a major factor in the fluctuating performance has been the demonetization factor. If you see the growth of deposits rose very heavily in 16-17, because I think largely due to this demonetization, and it has come down now because it is more or less come back to the level pre-demonetization. Similarly, credit growth has also been there, perhaps because a lot more money is there with the banks, liquidity is there with the banks. So naturally the bank's performance, their role has been improving, and especially with the benefit to the agriculture sector being given, and writing off of loans and all that. I mean, they have been in a rather crunch situation for a long time, and now they have proposed a recapitalization scheme about 1 lakh crore of 88,000 crore or whatever. So apparently government is putting a lot of stress on improving the performance of banks.
But here I think, and I'll come to you, but Arun, the insolvency and bankruptcy code, that is an important step towards ensuring that there's quicker and faster resolution of NPAs.
That's right. But you just you haven't looked at the buyer's market. Who's buying the assets that are being put for auction after resolution? The market for these distressed assets is actually very, very, very small. And unless you have the kind of a market, vibrant market, you will not recover a huge amount from the loans that are being resolved. Now, unless you get, say, at least 50% of the value of the assets, that money has to come from the public exchequer by way of recapitalization. So the public policy goal in this entire insolvency procedure should be to minimize the haircut that the banks take, which means maximize the auctioned value of the assets being sold. For that, you need to create multiple bidders, which are missing right now in the scene.
All right. While we're of course discussing about what is it that we'll be seeing in the union budget and the other factors as well, let's also tell our viewers these are of course visuals of the President of India on his way to Parliament, where he'll be addressing the House, both the houses, in just a short while from now at the start of the budget session. And of course, these are visuals that are breathtaking, isn't it, Pranjal? Each time you see it, I mean, these are visuals. And the fog seems to have cleared. Clearly, I mean, I'm concerned with the fog today.
Pomp and splendor which happens around this, and I think it's always exciting to see this. And I think the cameras have been placed at some fantastic vantage points to give us a view that, when we are actually there, you don't get that kind of view. But it's clearly a treat to watch. Absolutely.
And Dr. Agnihotri, since we are looking forward to now the President's address, we've spoken about how important it is, what kind of indicators it probably gives as far as the future workings of the government is concerned. But just talking about the very fact that this is going to be Ramnath Kovind's first address as a president, what according to you would be significant to look out for?
Well, as Pranjal has already said, this is a President's address is something that is the government's prerogative, and actually it is approved by the cabinet. Cabinet's approval is there, so it is a policy of the government, and there is very little leeway for the President to say anything on his own in this speech. So we have to look at, I mean, only the person changes from one presidency to another, but the policy of the President's speech, the theory or the practice behind the President's speech is the same.
But
so
at
we
some
have
point,
to see the government has not changed, so the President's speech will also be what it was in the past.
But sir, do you see a situation where our President, the new President, would maybe want to put some personal touch to his delivery and some points in terms of prioritizing issues? So the government will say, these are the 5 or 7 issues, and then the President says, well, we agree with what you're saying, but perhaps I would like to go with this first. So do you see in your experience something like this having happened in the past?
It may happen in due course, but I think it is early days for the present President to sort of be able to get into the technicalities of this kind of thing and then give adequate advice in these matters so that it is incorporated in advance in whatever is the speech to be given. So I think if there are any consultations before the speech is finalized, then perhaps he may have given some inputs, as he has been saying. You see, in this, on the eve of the 26th January, he has stressed certain points, and I'm sure those points must have been taken note of by the government, and they may have been arranged. The speech may have focused, put some more focus on some of those things which he has spoken in his address on the eve of the Republic Day.
It's also interesting that the budget session is happening around beating the retreat ceremony. So, you know, you also see that colorful atmosphere at Vijay Chowk because of the change in the dates of the budget. This is a confluence of two different events happening together.
Yes, yes, it is there, and I think gradually the government move is to move to the presentation of or starting of the budget in on 1st January. So you may very soon have a budget session in December or November or sometimes like that. But of course it is a matter of time. But of course the confluence of events is there, and it is very colorful and very attractive.
On this, the president saying anything beyond what the government wants him to say, I think it is ruled out. That would be against the principles of democracy. The budget, the policy statement of the government, which the government articulates, is to be determined by the elected government of the day. The president cannot put his own policy implement on that document.
No, I think it's
he might,
what we probably mean is,
or add some shairi or something.
We probably mean and what he stresses upon. You know, should we take indicators of what he goes with first?
He has no freedom to give any stress apart from what the government wants it. Because
okay, so Arun, that's a great point. What do you think then would be the three key priorities? While we'll hear it in a few seconds, if not minutes from now, what do you think the presidential address will focus on? What will be the theme and focus?
Like I said, you know, he would call for more unity, cohesion for the nation to move forward, address the distress in rural areas, the farmers who are the backbone of this country, make some noise about the armed forces who again have to be protected, who are playing a major role. You know, the gap between India's defense forces and the capability of those whom we see as potential rivals, if not enemies, is growing. I'm not talking about Pakistan. In terms of advanced digital technologies, computing ability, the ability to wage an information warfare or cyber warfare, unless we use these occasions to allocate sufficient money and launch programs that will put us on par, we will be left far, far behind.
All right, so the president has of course reached the parliament premises. Dr. Agnihotri, very quickly you'd like to make a point.
Job creation. I think that would be another area on which the government would be stressing, because there has been a lot of talk about jobless growth and kind of things, and a lot of jibes have also been there on that issue. So I think job creation may also get some mention in this budget.
Absolutely. Looking forward to, of course, what the president says in just a short while from now. Just a few minutes, in fact, to go, about 5 minutes to go. As you can see, the cavalcade there and also the motorcade now in the parliament premises. A few minutes ago, we saw the central hall was, of course, packed. That is where, of course, the president would be addressing both the houses of parliament. And we're looking forward to that, and we'll bring that, of course, live to you. While we're waiting for that, of course, we're talking about the significance of the president's address, the indicators that it may, in fact, give for what the government plans to do further on, what would be being an election year as well. We'll stay with these visuals and very quickly, again, come back to you, Dr. Agnihotri, and just very quickly give us a sense of what we are seeing now and what we'll be seeing in the next few minutes. Taking place when the budget session starts?
Well, the president is going to be received by the speaker and the chairman, Rajya Sabha, and the prime minister and other ministers, and then he will walk down and enter the central hall, and that is where he will then meet and greet the members of parliament sitting on either side of the aisle, and then he will go to the dais, and then the proceedings of the president's address will begin. So you will see him walking down.
Is there something special, Dr. Agnihotri, when a new president takes charge and for the first time the President speaks, is any special procedure put in place as against the next subsequent years?
No, there is nothing special about this particular occasion, because these institutions are permanent and there is nothing new happening in terms of institutional arrangements. So there is no change.
But the significance of the cavalcade and the is there something which is important about this, or this is just something which has come across and got ingrained over the last few years?
It's a tradition that's being followed all the years.
Same. I mean, there is no change in the procedures for a very long time. As you can see, he's walking up the stairs of the Parliament.
And how long do we? How long is the speech
It all depends. You see, earlier the President used to read out his speech in Hindi or English and again repeat it in this. I mean, again the Vice President supposed to read out the second version. But over the years, only the President reads out his speech, and then the Vice President reads out the first para and the last para of the speech, instead of reading out the whole speech. Actually, one of the Vice Presidents had a major health problem while reading out the whole speech, and that is why this new practice was introduced. And therefore, going by the past trends, I think this whole thing should last about an hour and a half at the most. Hour and a half at the most.
So after the President, the Vice President will also address, but only the beginning and the end of...
The Vice President will address, I presume the President will address in Hindi, and then the Vice President will read out the first and last para of the budget speech or the speech of the President.
But that's a practical consideration.
Yeah, practical consideration.
There is no institutional requirement for it.
I will take it as read, because he has already this thing, and just to give a flavor, he will read out some portions.
So how is the Vice President's speech different from the President's address?
No, nothing. It is the other version
it's
of
just a repetition. It's just
English.
Okay.
It's only a language.
Hindi or English, depends on if President speaks in English.
Right.
Then his is the Hindi version.
Okay.
And if the President speaks in Hindi, then it is the English version. Because that is what the Constitution prescribes, Hindi and English.
All right. We're just waiting just about 2 minutes to go.
This is the procession. This is called the procession.
Okay. And they're now heading towards Central Hall.
Inside their Central Hall, yes.
I find this pomp and ceremony a little too much. At least inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan, some of these things have been done away with by Pranab Mukherjee. I was appalled when I went for dinner to the Rashtrapati Bhavan some years ago. The Scottish pipe, this bagpipes were playing, and a guy was moving around like a colony.
This is to tell the House that the President has entered. And therefore they have